also presented their views on the bill. Thereafter, the Joint Committee conducted 5 meetings to deliberate on the oral and written submissions before crafting its draft report, which was considered and adopted. To that end, the committee expresses its profound gratitude to the people of Zimbabwe who took their time to attend the public hearings held in the administrative districts and present their written submissions on the bill. Committee's findings. Clause 2, we'll start with clause number 2, the transferring of voter registration and management of the voters' roll from the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission to the Registrar General. The majority of submissions strongly supported transferring the responsibility for voter registration as well as compiling and maintaining the voters' roll from ZEC to the Civil Registry Department Registrar General. Participants argued that the Registrar General is uniquely positioned to maintain an accurate, up-to-date voters' roll, effectively preventing the prolonged inclusion of deceased or non-existent individuals. Given that the Registrar General already serves as the custodian of vital civil records, including birth and death certificates, as well as national identity data, the public noted that this transition would enhance administrative efficiency, accuracy, and centralize accountability. Furthermore, it would eliminate a duplication of roles, minimize data management inconsistencies, and ultimately strengthen the integrity and credibility of the voters' roll. This approach also aligns with international benchmarks where civil registries routinely manage voter registration data. Ultimately, this reallocation of duties would allow ZEC to concentrate more effectively on its core mandates of voter education and election management. The minority view opposed transferring the voters' roll to the Registrar General, recalling that management of the roll had previously been stripped from that office due to some serious concerns over credibility and manipulation. The minority further argued that ZEC is far better suited to manage the roll, raising several key concerns regarding the proposed transfer. It was submitted that as a government department, the Registrar General lacks the constitutional safeguards designed to protect institutional independence, expertise, and integrity. Shifting this responsibility risks increasing executive influence and undermining the neutrality of the electoral process. In addition, fragmenting the responsibilities of electoral management compromises accountability, which could severely damage both public trust and international credibility. Furthermore, entrusting voter registration to independent commissions aligns with established best practices across other SADC countries. It was submitted that the significant financial investments already made into ZEC's biometric voter registration serve as a compelling reason to maintain the current structure rather than introducing an inefficient administrative shift. During consultations with ZEC, the committee was informed about the potential occurrence of fragmented roles among institutions. It further underscored the need for clear legislative timelines spelling out when the voters' roll will be availed to the electoral body. ZEC had migrated from the ward-based to the polling station-based voting, as well as biometric registration of voters, and hoped that these milestones would be maintained if this function was transferred to the Registrar General. In its humble submission, it had recommended that the status quo should be maintained. The committee's observations. The committee noted that leveraging on vital civil service records provides a distinct technical advantage in maintaining an accurate voters' roll, while simultaneously acknowledging legitimate concerns surrounding the need for institutional independence for the electoral body. Furthermore, the committee observed the significant investments already made by ZEC, particularly the acquisition of biometric equipment for effective voter registration, and also the poll-based voting system, which was introduced in 2018. The committee recommends the adoption of Clause 2 to decisively address historical challenges where deceased individuals have remained on the voters' roll. We're turning now to clause number 3, the changing the election of the president from a direct public vote to election by parliament. The majority of submissions strongly favored this amendment, arguing that the proposed model would foster greater collaboration and mutual confidence between the executive and the parliament, ultimately enhancing governance and policy alignment. They emphasized that electing the president through parliament would substantially reduce the immense financial cost of organizing nationwide presidential elections. Furthermore, they noted that past elections had been marred by political tension, violence, and contestation, especially in respect of results for presidential elections, issues that would be mitigated or eliminated by narrowing the electorate to directly elected representatives. Supporters pointed to successful continental precedents, noting that nations like South Africa and Botswana utilized this system to achieve greater political stability, minimize electoral expenses, and achieve robust institutional accountability. Back home, they observed that an identical model was already successfully utilized at the local government level, where mayors are elected by sitting councillors, proving the system's practicality and familiarity within the government's existing governance structures. Finally, they argued that electing the president through parliament remains fully consistent with Section 88, paragraph 1 of the Constitution, which states that executive authority derives from the people of Zimbabwe and must be exercised in accordance with this Constitution. Because citizens will continue to exercise their democratic will through their elected representatives, reviving a legitimate constitutional practice utilized between 1980 and 1990. Given that Parliament, in terms of Section 97 of the Constitution, has a role to impeach the president, they indicated that it was consistent for it to elect the president. Conversely, a minority of submissions opposed the amendment, viewing the shift as a retrogressive step that would dismantle the democratic milestones achieved since independence by undermining the fundamental principle of one person, one vote. Dissenting voices argued that restricting the presidential vote exclusively to members of parliament would effectively circumvent the will of the broader electorate, fundamentally altering the source and character of executive legitimacy. From their perspective, removing the direct vote represents an erosion of democratic participation and a direct infringement on every citizen's constitutional right to free, fair, and regular elections with regard to the election of the president. Committee's observations. The committee noted that since Section 97 of the Constitution vests the power to remove the president in Parliament, therefore Parliament should ordinarily possess the authority to elect the president. The committee is convinced that adopting a legislative appointment model would significantly reduce the fiscal burden associated with direct presidential elections. Furthermore, this approach would bolster political stability by minimizing contentious electoral disputes which have characterized previous presidential elections, while firmly anchoring executive accountability within representative democratic institutions. The committee's recommendations. Informed by the observations, the committee strongly recommends the adoption of Clause 3, thereby mandating Parliament to elect the President. Clause number 4. Clauses 4, 9, and 10. This is the extension of the electoral cycle of the President and members of Parliament from 5 to 7 years and its application to the incumbent. The majority of public submissions favored the adoption of longer electoral cycles, primarily because reducing the frequency of elections mitigates both the immense fiscal burden on the state and the disruptive perpetual campaign mode that frequently derails governance and development. The majority argued that extended electoral cycles diffuse the political toxicity inherent in election seasons, providing government with the necessary time horizons to fully implement long-term projects while ensuring political stability and continuity. They noted that development activities routinely slow down or halt during election periods as national focus shifts entirely towards political processes. Furthermore, submissions pointed out that extended mandates are not unprecedented globally, citing Egypt's 6-year presidential cycle and Azerbaijan's 7-year electoral cycle as successful examples. Conversely, the minority submissions contended that in a democratic society, leaders must remain directly elected by the populace, arguing that structural constitutional changes of this magnitude should be subjected to a national referendum to guarantee broad public participation and democratic legitimacy. They argued that longer electoral cycles disenfranchise citizens and weaken executive accountability by concentrating power within political elites. Extending the electoral cycle was viewed as diluting the democratic cycles that keep leadership answerable to the public, as in shorter terms, the electorate swiftly removes underperforming public officials. The minority also, as a direct violation of Section 328, Paragraph 7 of the Constitution, which explicitly prohibits any amendment extending a term of office from benefiting the incumbent holder of that office. Committee's observations. The committee observed that major developmental projects, particularly those yielding the most profound socio-economic impacts on the populace, inherently require extended timelines to reach full implementation and completion. Members further noted that global jurisdictions utilizing longer electoral mandates consistently exhibit greater political stability and achieve more meaningful, sustained progress in their national development agendas. While the committee holds the view that a long-term, an 8 or even 10-year term would be ideal to maximize these development benefits, a balanced compromise is necessary to align with public feedback and institutional realities. The committee's recommendations. Consequently, the committee recommends the adoptions of clauses 4, 9, and 10, thereby extending the electoral cycle for the President and Parliament to 7 years. Clause 5, removal of reference to the first Vice President for consistency. Public submissions were entirely unanimous in their support of the proposal to eliminate hierarchical distinctions between the vice presidents. The public observed that utilizing the uniform designation of vice president without hierarchical stratification promotes a sense of equality within the presidium. This structural alignment is anticipated to foster greater political unity and enhance the principles of collective leadership at the highest level of executive government. Committee's recommendations. The committee concurs with submissions and recommends that this clause should be adopted as presented. Clause number 6, provision for Vice President to be elected by Parliament in the event of a vacancy, removing automatic succession. The public submissions were once again unanimous, including that the proposed amendment represents a practical cost-saving measure. Stakeholders emphasized that this mechanism effectively averts the prohibitive financial expenses associated with staging mid-term presidential elections, while simultaneously safeguarding national stability by immediately closing any governmental succession vacuum that otherwise might arise. Committee's recommendations: this committee concurs with the public's views and recommends that this clause should be adopted as presented. Clause number 7, raising the qualifications for appointment as Attorney General to those required of a Supreme Court judge. The committee received a diverse range of submissions regarding the proposed amendment, with the clear majority expressing strong support for the measure. The majority argued that aligning the qualifications of the Attorney General with those of a Supreme Court judge provides a vital safeguard for the office. They emphasized that such stringent criteria would guarantee that the appointee possesses the highest caliber of legal expertise, professional competence, and personal integrity. Consequently, this elevated standard is expected to significantly improve the quality of legal counsel provided to the government and substantially strengthen the state's capacity to handle complex constitutional and legislative affairs. On the contrary, the minority view raised concerns that the amendment could overly restrict the recruitment process. Committee's recommendations: having carefully weighed both perspectives, the committee stands in alignment with the majority submissions. It recognizes that the long-term benefits of securing top-tier legal and constitutional stewardship for the nation outweigh the risks of a more restrictive selection pool. Accordingly, the committee recommends this clause for adoption without amendment. Clause 4.8, can you hear me? Clause 8, increase in the membership of Senate from 80 to 90 by including 10 presidential appointees. The proposed increase in Senate membership garnered a strong majority of support from public submissions. The majority argued that expanding the chamber would inject vital specialized knowledge and diverse professional expertise into the legislative process. Furthermore, the public noted that a larger membership would broaden the pool of qualified individuals available for ministerial appointments. They also view the additional 10 members as necessary to bridge political and social divides by incorporating non-partisan objectives into governance. The amendment is therefore expected to elevate the quality of decision-making and foster greater national cohesion. In contrast, the minority submissions expressed reservations, cautioning that increasing membership could undermine the Senate's independence and compromise its crucial role in holding the executive accountable. Dissenting voices warned that the shift might weaken the chamber's representative character and create a public perception of excessive executive influence over the legislative branch. Additionally, they argued that the amendment could result in a Senate composition disproportionate to the outcomes of the popular voting process, thereby eroding its democratic legitimacy. Committee's recommendations. After thorough consideration of both the public enthusiasm for enhanced expertise and the expressed concerns regarding institutional balance, the committee finds that the potential benefits to governance and national unity were compelling. Consequently, the committee recommends this clause for adoption. We now turn to clauses 11, 12, and 13. That is the establishment of the Delimitation Commission, transfer of delimitation functions from ZEC to the new constitution. The majority of submissions strongly favored the establishment of a separate Delimitation Commission, arguing it would significantly alleviate the heavy workload currently borne by ZEC. The majority believed that a dedicated entity would foster greater fairness, transparency, and accessibility throughout the electoral process. Furthermore, they emphasized that such an institutional split would cultivate technical specialization in the complex task of drawing constituency boundaries, thereby directly addressing historical shortcomings in ZEC's handling of previous delimitation exercises. On the other hand, the minority raised concerns regarding institutional independence and public trust. They cautioned that transferring the delimitation mandate away from ZEC might weaken the primary electoral management body and spark fears of political meddling in electoral affairs. Committee's observations. The committee observed that past delimitation exercises managed by ZEC did encounter notable challenges, which underscores the merit of a specialized body. However, the committee highlights the absolute necessity for meticulous coordination between ZEC and the newly proposed commission to guarantee a seamless transfer of roles and operational data. Furthermore, in alignment with the direct transmission from ZEC itself, the committee agrees that the new body's title should omit the word electoral. This linguistic distinction is crucial to clearly separate its specific boundary drawing mandate from ZEC's broader overarching electoral responsibilities. The committee's recommendations. Having carefully balanced the need for technical specialization against the imperative of safeguarding institutional independence, the committee recommends the adoption of clauses 11, 12, and 13 to establish a dedicated boundary drawing authority. To ensure absolute clarity regarding its mandate, the committee further recommends that this new entity be formally named the Zimbabwe Delimitation Commission. Clause 14, jurisdiction of the Constitutional Court. The majority of submissions strongly supported extending the court's jurisdiction beyond strictly political disputes to encompass matters of significant public importance. They argued that this expansion would greatly broaden access to justice and ensure that pressing national issues receive timely, definitive resolutions. Furthermore, stakeholders believed that this shift would substantially enhance the court's vital role as a primary guardian of constitutional rights. On the contrary, the minority submissions raised concerns that broadening the court's purview would trigger an unmanageable increase in its workload, ultimately leading to case backlogs and judicial delays. Some also expressed concern that this shift might inadvertently deprioritize specialized knowledge, incentivizing the selection of judges with general legal expertise over those with deep specializations in constitutional law and human rights. The committee's observations. The committee observed that apprehensions regarding a crippling workload, systemic backlogs, and severe delays are unfounded and unsupported by empirical data. While an expanded jurisdiction will undeniably increase the volume of cases brought before the court, the committee notes that this does not automatically translate into judicial delays. Rather, the restructuring will effectively increase the number of available judicial levels, optimizing the allocation of legal resources and maintaining efficiency. The committee observed that there would be problems to do with the jurisdiction of the Supreme and Constitutional Courts, which may eventually need to compete in terms of which matters can be finalized by which court. There will also be a problem to do with the hierarchy of the two courts, making it difficult to determine which courts holds final authority. If the Constitutional and Supreme Courts interpret laws differently, lower courts are left confused about which legal precedents binds them. Committee's recommendations. The committee recommends for the adoption of the clause with an amendment to clarify the hierarchy of the two courts. Clause 15, amendment of Section 180, appointment of judges. The majority of submissions supported the proposed amendment to vest the appointment of judges in the President to be exercised in consultation with the Judicial Service Commission. They expressed the view that this mechanism would strengthen judicial independence and streamline the selection process by eliminating perceived inefficiencies associated with current procedures. Transparency, upholding meritocracy, and maintaining public confidence in the judiciary. They cautioned that transitioning to a presidential appointment process would dilute existing constitutional protections designed to insulate the judiciary from excessive executive influence. The committee's recommendations. The committee notes the competing viewpoints regarding excessive involvement and public transparency in judicial selections, as well as the regional precedents cited by the public. However, having balanced the objective of administrative efficiency and executive accountability against these concerns, the committee stands in alignment with the majority view. Accordingly, the committee recommends the clause for adoption. Clause 16, amendment of Section 212, functions of the Defense Forces. The majority of submissions expressed strong support for the amendment, operating under the view that the proposed changes would effectively limit undue military influence in civilian governments. Those in support of the clause argued that establishing clearer boundaries for the military would safeguard democratic processes and consequently prove vital to maintaining long-term national stability. On the other hand, a minority of submissions raised concerns regarding the broader implications of the change. They cautioned that the amendment could inadvertently and materially weaken the constitutional fidelity obligation of the Defense Forces. Committee's recommendations. The committee acknowledges the crucial importance of balancing civil-military relations and preserving the constitutional integrity of the armed forces. However, recognizing that fortifying democratic governance and securing state stability were paramount public interests, the committee stands in agreement with the majority. Accordingly, the committee recommends the clause for adoption. Amendment of Section 239, that's clause number 17, functions of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. Members of the public were unanimous in their support for repealing these specific functions and from ZEC and reassigning them to the Registrar General. Contributors consistently expressed the view that this institutional realignment would significantly improve administrative efficiency and reduce institutional overload. By divesting ZEC of these secondary duties, the amendment would allow the Commission to focus its resources and attention entirely on its core mandate of conducting and supervising national elections. During consultations with ZEC, the committee was informed by the electoral body that Clause 17 had repealed its function to accredit observers, but the accreditation of observers was not assigned to any other agency or body. Committee's observations. The committee re-emphasized that the successful execution of this structural shift depends on close, continuous, and effective collaboration between ZEC and the newly proposed Zimbabwe Delimitation Commission and the Registrar General to ensure a seamless transfer of relevant duties, operational data, and responsibility. Furthermore, the committee highlights that comprehensive staff training will be absolutely essential to guarantee that personnel were fully equipped to perform effectively in their newly defined roles. The committee's recommendations. The committee recommends this clause for adoption with an amendment for ZEC to retain the function for the accreditation of observers. Clauses 18 and 19, that is, the repeal of the Zimbabwe Gender Commission and amendment of Section 243. The majority of submissions supported the proposed repeal of the provisions establishing the Zimbabwe Gender Commission and the subsequent transfer of its responsibilities to a specialized department under the Zimbabwean Human Rights Commission. The submissions supporting the repeal of this provision argued that this consolidation would eliminate the duplication of institutional mandates, optimize resource utilization, and foster a more integrated, holistic approach to the protection of human rights within the country. The minority, which included submissions from officials of the Zimbabwe Gender Commission itself, strongly cautioned against the merger. They argued that absorbing gender portfolios into a broader human rights framework risks inducing gender blindness, where the specific needs of women and girls were overshadowed by general human rights concerns. They warned that the dissolution of a standalone entity would weaken dedicated oversight and reduce focused attention on systematic gender inequalities, gender-based discrimination, and gender-responsive governance. The Zimbabwe Gender Commission contended that the fiscal benefits of a merger would be negligible, as it has historically operated on just 0.02 to 0.04 of the national budget. Furthermore, the minority stressed that dismantling the commission could reverse historic gains and cause significant reputational damage, portraying Zimbabwe as backsliding on its commitments to gender equality. They noted that the standalone Gender Commission directly fulfills the nation's international obligations under the 1994 Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, as well as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination.
Honorable members, can you lower your whispers? Can you lower your whispers? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mr. Speaker. So their submissions emphasize that a dedicated commission remains best placed to demand accountability and track commitments across all government ministries, departments, and agencies. Committee's observations. The committee acknowledges that the majority of the submissions were in support of the clause regarding the need to repeal the provision and incorporate the Zimbabwe Gender Commission into the Zimbabwean Human Rights Commission. There were, however, concerns by some stakeholders, especially women's organizations, that gender issues still require a specialized standalone institution in line with the requirements under CEDAW and to ensure continued gender mainstreaming in the country. Committee's recommendations. The committee recommends that the Zimbabwe Gender Commission should remain in place and the clause should not be adopted. Clause 20, amendment of section 259, appointment of the Prosecutor General. The majority of submissions expressed strong support for the proposed amendment to section 259 regarding the appointment of a Prosecutor General. Submissions consistently pointed out that the changes would streamline the selection and appointment procedures, thereby significantly enhancing administrative efficiency within the justice system. Committee's recommendations. Recognizing the clear operational benefits of a more responsive and streamlined appointment framework, the committee stands in agreement with the consensus of submissions. Accordingly, the committee recommends Clause 20 for adoption. Clause 21, amendment of Section 281, principles to be observed by traditional leaders. The majority of public submissions supported the amendment allowing traditional leaders to participate in political activities. The public, including several traditional leaders themselves, expressed the view that as an integral part of the Zimbabwean citizenry, traditional leaders should enjoy the same fundamental political rights as ordinary citizens. The public submitted that their active involvement would enhance inclusivity, strengthen community representation, and accelerate development at the local level. On the contrary, the minority view, supported by a submission from the Chief's Council, steadfastly opposed the amendment. They argued that the existing constitutional prohibition on political participation was a vital safeguard that insulates the institution of traditional leadership from political manipulation, thereby protecting its integrity and independence as enshrined in Section 283C of the Constitution. The Chief's Council cautioned that political involvement would compromise the neutrality expected of traditional leaders, thereby risking deep social divisions and expose vulnerable rural populations to discrimination on political grounds. Furthermore, concerns were raised that political partisanship would distort the administration of justice within communal areas, fostering political intolerance and raising the specter of reprisals against dissenting community members. In addition, the Chief's Council highlighted that engaging in political activities would directly violate the constitutional mandates requiring traditional leaders to act impartially and forbidding them from political alignment in their capacity as judicial officers, as espoused in sections 1631 and 1654, as read together with section 283C of the Constitution. In addition, the Chief's Council submitted that there was need for an amendment to section 285, paragraph 6 of the Constitution to align the term of office for the President and Deputy President of the National Council of Chiefs with that of the presidential and parliamentary terms as proposed in clauses 4 and 9 of the bill. In fact, the Chief's Council advocated for an amendment of clause 21 of the bill to provide for the repealing of section 285(6) of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, to remove all prescribed term limits for both the President and the Deputy President of the National Council of Chiefs. Committee's observations. The committee noted the contradiction between the right of traditional leaders to participate in political activities as proposed in Clause 21 and the institutional imperative of traditional leaders' neutrality, particularly regarding their roles as judicial officers in terms of sections 1631 and 1654 of the Constitution. Committee's recommendations. While the majority of traditional leaders and the general public supported the provision regarding the participation of traditional leaders in politics, the proposed amendment is in conflict with section 1631, 1654 of the Constitution, and as such, the status quo should remain. Secondly, the committee recommends for the alignment of the electoral cycles for the President and Deputy President of the National Council of Chiefs from 5 to 7 years as per the proposed parliamentary and presidential terms. Clause 22, National Peace and Reconciliation Commission. The majority of submissions express support for the proposed repeal of Part 6 of Chapter 2. In any event, as has been mentioned previously, the term of the commission had already expired, and therefore the committee's recommendations acknowledge the competing views regarding the optimal timeline for transitional justice institutions. The committee also noted that it was a procedural matter since the commission had ceased to exist in 2023. Eventually, the conclusion. Generally, the Joint Committee was in support of the bill and urges the two houses to consider the proposed recommendations. In its analysis, the Joint Committee sought to ensure that there was consistency between the bill's provisions and the Constitution, as well as aligning with the expectations and aspirations of the people and regional and international best practices. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Zobo, for completeness of your report. If you could include the two annexures of your report, if you can give that to the clerks at the table so that those two annexures appear in the Hansard, as well as tables 31, 2, 3, 4, and table 5. Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that debate to now adjourn.